Calificas para ser legal, ¿quieres saber? Solo llama al abogado Andres Mejer.
Good morning and welcome to the English version of our show, Para Ser Legal, in English, Get Legal. So today, I want to talk about three different things. First, shutdown's over, but what the Senate bill that Trump wanted to pass last week, how that would have affected DACA and TPS. Why is that important? Because the shutdown's over for the next 3 weeks. Congress now has to decide how they're going to fund the government going forward after those 3 weeks. And Trump is still insisting he wants his wall, but he also wants to curb legal immigration. And no one's talking about what this bill would have meant for DACA and TPS. Secondly, I want to talk about who can apply for DACA today. And third, we're going to give you an example of how the government wanted to deport Manuel, who had DACA. And even though he had DACA, government still wanted to deport him. So welcome to our show. My name is Andres Mejer. I'm a speaker, published author, and an immigration attorney. And on this program, Para Ser Legal, Get Legal, this is where we discuss immigration news and how it affects you. So, shutdown deal, Senate bill. What did it mean? There's a couple of provisions in that bill that affected DACA and TPS. So first, we'll talk about DACA. The bills would have required immigrants to show that they earned over 125% of poverty guidelines. Now, remember, someone who doesn't have DACA does not have employment authorization, does not have the ability to legally work in the U.S. But despite that, they're being told that they have to earn more than 125% of the poverty guidelines. Now, the reason for that, I think, is pretty simple. They want to make sure that if I'm an immigrant and I apply for DACA, but I have kids, that my household doesn't qualify for benefits like WIC or food stamps. So in order for me to get this employment authorization, I need to show that I'm over the amount that would otherwise allow my children to receive health insurance or assistance in school with the lunch program, or even food stamps. They wanted to change people who can apply for DACA. They wanted to increase things that made me inadmissible to this new status. Look, crimes we knew about, that really hasn't changed. If I committed fraud, if I killed somebody, I'm not getting DACA. If I was convicted of a DUI, if I was convicted of drug possession, disqualified. That's not new. But if I made a claim to be a U.S. citizen, if I had a crime as a juvenile, which up until now is not really considered a crime, it would be for DACA. If I had an order of removal, the point of DACA is it creates protection from deportation and gives employment authorization to a category of people that meet certain guidelines. In the exercise of the government's prosecutorial discretion, what the program said is, you show me the following, then you're not a priority for deportation, and you will receive these benefits. So what Trump was trying to do with this bill is limit that group even further. Someone who said they made a false claim to U.S. citizen. Someone who hasn't paid civil judgments to a crime victim. How many of those? Probably not a lot, but it happens. For example, let's say I was involved in a fight. Somebody was injured. And as a condition of, maybe I pled guilty to a minor infraction. Let's say it was a bar fight. And at the end of it, the prosecutor offered that I pay his medical bills. Let's say it's $5,000. And I plead guilty to a municipal ordinance. Now, that just means I made too much noise. I was disrespectful to police or law enforcement in some fashion. Not a crime. And what happens if I haven't yet completed those $5,000? Well, or if I can't prove that I did it, I would be disqualified from DACA for something that isn't a crime. You can't have been engaged in any sexual harassment. So now we're talking about an accusation. If someone accused me of doing that, I might be disqualified. If I had an order of removal back in the day, I'm disqualified. If the government wants to deport me, I'm disqualified. So even if I have DACA, the government can still deport me for X reason. Again, not clear under what circumstances that would be applied, but that is a big deal. And I'll give you an example of what the government tried to do and how we were able to help Manuel in that exact scenario. And another big one is no advance parole for DACA. Now, there isn't anyone, but Trump eliminated it. But this rule would have said that if someone entered under advance parole, it wouldn't qualify to give him a benefit. It wouldn't qualify as legal entry. Give you an example. Let's say I'm a dreamer. I applied for DACA. I have DACA. I applied to leave the U.S. and go back to Chile, which is approved. I do leave. I come back. I now have a legal entry. If I'm married to a U.S. citizen, which I am, she can now apply for me, and I can get my green card in the United States without having to leave. What Trump is trying to say is that legal entry does not count. Now, it's not, the way he wanted to do it was not effective, but doesn't change the fact that that's what he tried to do. Another issue, TPS, another temporary program that this came from Congress, but what the Trump administration did is say Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, Haiti, these countries that had TPS, well, the conditions have changed and those immigrants can now go back. So effectively, he eliminated TPS for hundreds of thousands of immigrants. Now, these changes to DACA, he also want to apply to DPS. Now, people who had TPS or who had DACA would now be disqualified. And if they're disqualified, well, they can be placed in removal proceedings. That's a big deal. What was the goal of that bill? The goal of that bill was to secure $5.7 billion in funding so that the Trump administration could build the wall in the southern border with Mexico. What Trump said is, what he was saying is, look, you give me the money for the wall, and I will extend protection to DACA and TPS for another 3 years. Now, the only reason that there's a problem for the DACA and TPS recipients is because Trump took it away. So Trump takes away protection and says, I'll give it back to you for a couple of years as long as you give me my wall. Give me my permanent fix, and I'll give you a temporary fix to your temporary situation. That makes no sense. But on top of that, I'm going to further restrict who can get DACA and who can get or keep TPS. And if for whatever reason I want to deport you anyway, you can't use DACA or TPS to protect you from deportation, which is the whole point of that program. It's a circular situation. Didn't make a whole lot of sense. Still doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But it's important that we discuss this because there's going to be ongoing negotiations. And we need to make sure that these changes to existing programs are never implemented. Now, who can apply for DACA today? Well, there are still no new petitions being accepted. What does that mean? You must have applied for DACA and have been approved for DACA in order to renew your DACA now. Example, let's say I entered the United States in 2010 when I was 12. I went to high school here. I graduated. I haven't left. I entered before I was 15. But because I didn't enter before June 5th, 2007, I am disqualified. I had to have been here before 2007. So I couldn't qualify when the program existed. If they moved up the dates, I might have been able to qualify, depending on when that deadline would have passed. If I entered in October, or if I entered in June, in what year. So you must have applied for DACA at some point before it was rescinded, and have been approved. Now, what happens if my DACA expired or terminated for over a year? Here's where it gets complicated, because what the Trump administration said is you can't renew your DACA. You must file a new application. Now, I know that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. We're talking about somebody that applied for DACA, was approved for DACA, and then his DACA expired for whatever reason. Let's say he was being charged with some crimes. He was fighting those crimes, and until those case got resolved, he didn't want to apply for something that he thought he might not get. Once the case was resolved, was favorably disposed, he then applied. But more than a year had passed from his initial expiration. So what the government says is, listen, you're going to have to file a new application. Why is that relevant? Because his initial application had to prove, 5 or 6 different things. One of them was that he entered the United States before he turned 16, and he entered before June 5th, 2007. If you then renew it in time, you don't need to make that same showing again. All you need to do, all you need to do is show that you've been in the U.S. the past 2 years, you haven't been convicted of a disqualifying crime, and you're still in school, or you completed school. But if your expiration is more than a year, you have to do that initial showing again. It starts from the very beginning. Otherwise, you just apply to renew. So make sure your DACA doesn't expire, and make sure if it expires, it didn't expire for more than a year, because now you've made your job a whole lot harder. So we got a question from the audience from Sharon. She says, can someone on disability file for his wife? Yes, they can. There's a variety of things we're going to need to show in a family-based petition. But what Sharon is saying is, well, how do I meet the affidavit of support requirements? How can I show that my spouse is not going to be a public charge if I am disabled? Well, you're going to need a joint sponsor. Someone who's going to, so if I'm applying for my wife, one of the conditions is that for the next 5 or 10 years, my wife, I promise the government that she will not receive any benefits from the U.S. government. What the government is concerned about, saying, listen, if I'm going to give you legal status, if I'm going to allow you to be a lawful resident here in the United States, I, government, don't want to also support you. So the petitioner, the person who's asking that his spouse get this benefit, is saying, I guarantee that I will maintain my spouse at a financial amount 120% over the poverty guidelines. If I don't have that amount, if I don't earn enough alone, then I need to have a joint sponsor who's going to make the same promise. So yes, Sharon, someone on disability can file for his or her spouse. That's a way to address one of the requirements. Obviously, we have to evaluate the whole package. Was there legal entry? Is spouse a U.S. citizen? Is there anything else that would make your spouse inadmissible? We need to evaluate all those things. Give us a call. Happy to discuss it further. Back to who can renew. DACA must not have expired for more than a year, and you can apply for that lesser showing. Make sure that you take out your employment authorization card right now. Take a look at when it expires. Count backwards 120 to 150 days, meaning 4 or 5 months before it expires is when you should apply to renew it. Don't do it earlier because it'll be denied. Don't do it later. Take your first opportunity that you can and go ahead and do so. Now, let's talk about Manuel. Manuel has DACA. The government wanted to deport him. Government arrested him while he had DACA, put him in removal proceedings, and he was in jail for almost a year before we were able to get him out. Now, he had some bad legal advice, and he made some wrong decisions when he was younger. So let's go over his background. I mean, so Manuel was arrested 7 times. That's a lot. In April of 2011, while he was a minor, he was arrested for theft. The charges were dismissed. 4 months later, in August 2011, he was arrested for possessing marijuana. Charges were dismissed. In February 2015, he was approved for DACA. First time. That was his initial application. He now was over the right age. He was able to apply, and he was approved because he didn't have any crimes. In February 2015, he was arrested in Long Branch for criminal trespass. That was amended to a municipal ordinance. What's the relevance? So he pled guilty to something, but it wasn't a crime. It was civil in nature. Does that arrest and does not disqualify him from DACA. 2 months later, in April 2015, he was arrested for possessing marijuana, now as an adult. He applied for a program called conditional discharge, which means he was put on probation for a year. At the conclusion of probation, if he didn't violate the terms of probation, his charges were dismissed, and that's precisely what happened. It's a one-time get-out-of-jail-free card. You can only do it once in your life, and he used it. He completed the program, and he was not convicted of possessing marijuana. Now, in July 2016, he was arrested in Ocean Township for possessing marijuana again, and this time he pled guilty. He had an attorney. That same attorney, 1 month after he pled guilty, so he pled guilty in March 2017. In April 2017, he applied to renew his DACA. Now, his DACA was already expired. The attorney that helped him was apparently defending the criminal charge. He allowed, and the client allowed, DACA to expire. He waited until he pled guilty, and then he applied to renew it. Now, that causes all sorts of problems. Why? Possession of marijuana is 100% guaranteed denial of DACA and all expense paid, one-way ticket home. The moment he pled guilty to that, he was going to get deported. So now that he was disqualified and his attorney, allegedly the immigration attorney, applied to renew it, Manuel got fingerprinted. 3 weeks after fingerprinting, ICE came and detained him. Now, in between that time, he was charged in 2 more cases of possessing marijuana. In April 2017 in Long Branch, and in September 2017 in Red Bank. So now his parents came to us and said, "What do we do?" Mom says, "My son is being detained. We don't understand what happened. We were told everything was fine. Then ICE picked him up." So we started looking at what was going on. We didn't understand why his attorney would apply for DACA when he clearly was disqualified. So we had to do some damage control. We ordered the discovery. We ordered the information from Ocean Township Municipal Court. And we realized that the attorney was defending 2 people: the driver in the car, which was Manuel, and a passenger. And it turns out the drugs belonged to the passenger, not to our client. And there are certain safeguards that have to be done if an attorney is gonna defend 2 defendants at the same time. We pointed out that wasn't done to the judge. The case was reopened. The passenger went in and applied for the conditional discharge, which he received, and he essentially was admitting that the drugs were his and that it wasn't Manuel's. Why was that relevant? Because now Manuel has no conviction for possession. Yes, he still had 2 other cases where he was being charged with possession, but he wasn't convicted. So there's a difference between accusing someone of a crime and of being convicted of a crime. So we applied to renew his DACA, and that was approved. USCIS agreed. It said, yes, an accusation is not the same thing as a conviction, and he was statutorily eligible. Well, DACA is not a statute, but pursuant to the regulations, he was eligible to receive it. Now, had he been convicted of that crime in Long Branch and in Red Bank of also possession, he would immediately lose his DACA. Now, he was still being detained. We had to go to federal court and ask that a federal judge order his release, because at the end of the day, he now had DACA. Government still wanted to deport him, saying he's a danger to the community because of these arrests, and he had 2 pending charges. Now, in those 2 pending charges, one in Long Branch and one in Red Bank, we got them dismissed or downgraded. What does that mean? It means he was not convicted of possessing marijuana. So in total, Manuel had 7 arrests, and for purposes of this conversation, our client is not named Manuel. That's a fake name. But these facts are real. He was arrested 7 times. He was convicted of none of them. None of those arrests result in a disqualifying crime, either individually or in total. Because to lose DACA, or to be disqualified for DACA, you must have been convicted of an aggravated felony, a crime of moral turpitude, a significant misdemeanor like a DUI or domestic violence, or 3 or more misdemeanors, meaning minor crimes. He was not convicted of 3 or more misdemeanors, nor were any one of those crimes significant, immoral, or an aggravated felony. So he qualified for DACA. He kept his DACA, but the government still wanted to deport him, and the government did not want to release him from detention. They were saying, listen, those arrests alone mean he's a danger to the community. Normal people, quote unquote, that's what the ICE attorney told me, normal people don't get arrested 7 times. Normal people don't have access to good attorneys that can get them off of crimes they otherwise committed. This is words from the government's attorney. That's the position that they were taking, and that's what they were telling the judge. And the judge said, essentially, my hands are tied. He's not convicted. Regulations say he qualifies. He still has DACA. Now, the judge did tell the government's attorney, if he loses DACA, that's a different story. But today, he has protection from deportation. And for that reason, he released him. So Manuel was let out. Now the government appealed that decision, saying the judge did not have authority to release him. That is one of the things that Trump wanted to eliminate with his proposed Senate bill. He wanted to say DACA or TPS is not a protection for deportation. And if the government wants to deport you for whatever reason, they're allowed to do so, even though you have DACA or TPS. Monumental difference. Because Manuel, well, if he doesn't have DACA, he doesn't have anything else. It's his only protection to stay in the United States. Why would anybody apply for DACA if it doesn't protect you from deportation? The whole bill or the whole process becomes meaningless. If I have temporary protective status, it means I have status. But if the government can still deport me, what's the point? Why would I come out of the shadows and apply for that? Well, you wouldn't. And that's why it's important that everyone who listens to this understands what the Trump administration was really trying to do with that Senate bill. Now, that bill was not approved. It did not be, and we don't know what direction the negotiations will go. We will have to see. So stay tuned. We will discuss that in the weeks to come. However, if you want more information, about this or any other legal subject, but in particular immigration, how to become either a U.S. citizen or how to get legal status, give us a call. 888-888-0307. That's 888-888-0307. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on the web at andresmejerlaw.com. Our handle on all our social media platforms is Andres Mejer Law. I'm Andres Mejer, and I thank you for joining me in this week's immigration news on our program, on our English version of our radio show. Until next time.
Calificas para ser legal, ¿quieres saber? Solo llama al abogado Andres Mejer.